Hi, my name is Philip Liu, CEO at XBOsoft. I just finished up a great webinar and discussion with Rex Black from RBCS. What we discussed was hiring and managing international test teams. In summary, we discussed three main things. The first one was that Agile, from 2001, when the Agile Manifesto first came out, is now 17 years old. And who doesn't want to be agile? I mean, do you want to be slow and sluggish? I don't think so. But the thing is that we don't have to be agile per se according to the manifesto. We can really be agile and use agile principles and create whatever method or process works best for us in our own situation and context. The second thing we talked about was globalization. Now, globalization, first, maybe 20 years ago, was all about trade and exchanging products. Then it moved on to labor cost arbitrage in the year 2000, where we were outsourcing a lot of work abroad in terms of the year 2000 scare that we all remember. But now globalization is really about exchanges of information. And that's really been brought about by key technologies that have come forward in the last decade. Firstly, mobile. Secondly, would be data storage capabilities. And thirdly, would be processing capabilities, which enable big data, sensors, and all this information to be stored in the cloud and moved around very quickly. What all this is doing is really accelerating the development of technology and the development of software. And what this is driving is a real need to access talent from around the world. And that's why globalization is so important. And the thing is that in order to really access talent from around the world, we need to communicate and collaborate effectively. Now, what Rex and I talked about was that in order to communicate effectively, each team member in different locations, we may have to give and take in terms of time zones and meetings and using different tools. It requires a lot of patience, a lot of understanding to get the benefits of accessing the talent that's available today. And we're not talking now about cost arbitrage or savings in labor. What we're talking about is really being able to access the talent wherever it is to get the job done. And sometimes we have to be creative in doing so. So listen in. We've got a great discussion, and we had a lot of questions coming in from the audience as well. I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session of 2 Points of View at 2. I'm Rex Black, president of RBCS, a worldwide testing and quality assurance firm serving clients ranging from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. Since 1994, we've delivered insight and confidence to hundreds of clients around the world. We have a team of international consultants that deliver customized training, consulting, and expert services for companies that are looking to improve their test and quality assurance practices. In this session, am happy to welcome Phil Liu. Phil's bio describes him as an adventurer, traveler, and explorer with a day job at XBOsoft, where he is the CEO. And he is definitely a traveler, because I've run into Phil in all sorts of places around the world. Last time, I think, was Kuala Lumpur. At XBOsoft, he executes the company's vision by working with companies to examine their software QA and testing processes, not only from outside the box, but with no box. Starting with quick hit improvement actions, Phil works out roadmaps for continuous improvement. An avid international speaker, reader, cyclist, and traveler, he's open to tantalizing discussions on anything. And the anything that we came up with here has to do with the international nature of testing lately. So we'll jump right into that. If you have any questions during the course of this webinar, feel free to submit them at any time, but please note that they will be answered at the end. So let me get the slide up here. Hiring and managing international teams. So, as we all know, there's a lot of distributed work being done, and there are various challenges. So, Phil, why don't we start off with something that's probably sort of a universal challenge, whether it's international or not, which is the telecommuting versus agile topic. I mean, the some of the purists are real hardcore about this. Of everybody's got to be co-located, and I heard Alistair Coburn once say at a conference, ironically enough, a conference in Kiev, which was all staffed by people doing remote work. I think he said that if you're not doing co-located work, you're not doing Agile. And I get that he can say that, but I've got clients, and maybe you do too, where they're doing Agile, but there's plenty of telecommuting and remote work going on. So what are you seeing?
Well, that's an interesting, really cool topic, and I think that what we have to do is really think about what Agile really is and how you define it, if at all. If you remember, the Agile Manifesto came out in 2001.
Yeah.
And that was really kind of the beginning of globalization. And at that point, globalization really meant trading, and then it was migrating into outsourcing. And so there was a little bit of a kickback against that, and people wanting to be co-located and so forth. But co-location and does not necessarily, or not being co-located, does not prohibit Agile. Agile is really about collaboration, and because of today's tools and technologies available, we've surmounted that actual problem of having to be physically located, and so I'd have to disagree with that. I can't remember the person that you mentioned about, if you're not co-located, you're not doing Agile. I think that there's plenty of tools and methods, and the physical part of it is not really a stumbling block anymore, or a obstacle at all.
The guy is Alistair Coburn, who's one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto for what's that worth, whatever that's worth, right? I mean, I get that he gets to say that because he's Alistair Coburn and he signed the Agile Manifesto and he was in the room, but I have plenty of clients that say they're doing Agile and they use distributed or international teams. They allow telecommuting. They're not all co-located, and it seems to be working just fine for them. So, from a purely engineering point of view, where you focus on what works, not what dogma is, it seems to me the right way to go.
Well, I mean, there's two other things going against the grain of true physical co-location, and one of them is that millennials don't want to go into the office, and people want flexibility. And how do you deal with that and still be able to utilize talent wherever it happens to be? And you don't have people that want to go into the office every day. That's just the way it is these days, and we have to deal with that and make the best of it.
Yeah, very, very true. Or if they do have to go into the office, they insist on bringing their dog, which is fine by me.
Well, I've seen people bring dogs and even have their kids there. Everybody's all together. So.
Yeah, talk about co-located.
That's right. That's right.
The whole team is there, and the whole family.
That's right. That's right.
So, something else that I'm sure you've had a lot of experience dealing with in these kind of situations where you have to deal with disparate teams is how to use collaboration tools to try to deal with that distance. And I've seen this done well, and I've seen it done poorly for sure. Lots of email, of course, is one of the more painful ways of trying to deal with it. All the way up to these telepresence screens that are just like being there. So, what kind of things are you guys using at ExpoSoft, and what are you seeing with your clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, we have actually had some issues with that in terms of having too many emails. And you mentioned, the email chains just get too long, and you spending hours not only reading the email, but going back and see what was the original email, and what the whole chain of knowledge or train of thought going through that whole email. And sometimes that even what happens is the subject of the email changes from the subject line, right?
Yeah.
And so, what we did with our client was we said, hey, these emails just aren't working for either of us. We're spending a lot of time trying to read through these things and figure out the whole train of thought. And so we stopped doing emails. And what we do is we use a collaboration tool that actually, tracks the train of thought throughout the whole, I guess you could say, conversation. And we happen to use a tool called Bitrix. We use that, and then we use chats, just Skype or whatever chat tool, and instead of using email, because it just kind of gets too cumbersome and too long. You have 30 emails in a chain. It's just really hard to follow.
Yeah, for a while I was trying to adopt this no third reply rule with emails here at RBCS, and that helped us get better, which basically was anything, if it gets to the point where you're about to be the third reply on an email, pick up the phone, take it, needs to become some kind of face-to-face communication or something other than email, because just those endless email threads and back and forth and back and forth. And then, I'm sure you're as busy as I am, so I always find it really frustrating to open up my email and then see that there's this ping pong match that's been going on, and I'm now people are blocking, waiting for me to be available, and just creates this unnecessary sense of pressure, and and then of course the communication isn't really done real well, right? Because it's all about emptying the inbox rather than engaging in a really good discussion on a point.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is that a lot of times you just have to say, hey, let's have a phone call, do it the good old-fashioned way, and you can get rid of 30 emails with 5 minutes on actually talking on the phone.
Yeah, and of course it also reduces the risk of misunderstanding. I'm sure you've seen situations where somebody misunderstands something in an email. Sometimes that's got some sort of emotional ballast associated with it, and then it's you're just off to the races with this really counterproductive and enervating email sequence. People are arguing and fighting,
Yeah, that's a good point. Email is never good for anything other than really, short facts.
Yeah.
Emotions can get into it and have miscommunications and hurt feelings, and it's just can be a snowball.
Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of like communications and such, I know that you and I both do a lot of international business, international speaking, and so forth. What are your thoughts on English? Because it's an international language, kind of. But I mean, have you noticed the same things that I've noticed, where you can have two people speaking English to each other and they're talking right past each other because of various dialects or cultural elements?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when I talk to our folks, we have quite a few of our testers in China, as you mentioned earlier, and there's a big difference between speaking English and communicating. And so, I really work on with them on listening skills and trying to help them to really learn what the message is, and what the customer or client really wants, rather than the actual words. And I think a lot of times there's two problems. One of them is that people that are not native English speakers, they have a canned responses that they have without thinking too much about them. And the second thing is they're already trying to think of what to say before they're listening carefully to what the client says. And so when you're trying to do those two things at the same time, that doesn't work quite well. So, my advice is, for those that are having English as a second language, that, as you said, we all have to speak English, whether or not it's second or first language, because it has become the international language. Is to really practice listening skills and to listen before speaking, even though, as a non-native speaker, you're always working on, what am I going to say next, and how am I going to say it, and so forth. Really listen first.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I speak a little Spanish, and so when I go to countries where they're Spanish-speaking countries, one of the things that I always get to rediscover is that it's not speaking a language is hardly a binary thing. It's not like either you do or you don't speak the language, right? There's how much of the language do you know? And I can order dinner. I can get in a taxi and tell the taxi driver where I want to go and have various kinds of basic conversations in Spanish. And that sometimes gets me into trouble because they'll assume that I can actually speak it reasonably well, and then they'll start to with 200 mile an hour Espanol, and I'm like, no, más despacio, which means more slowly,
Right.
And then I get into business settings, and I'm trying to have a conversation, and I'll usually say, well, we could try it in Spanish, but there's a lot of it that I just that won't work, and I have to switch back into English. Yeah, it's I think it's really important to be aware of that. The degree to which the person you're speaking with actually speaks English or whatever the language is that you're speaking.
I think that so that brings up another issue, is that the person that is in a two-person or multi-person dialogue, the ones that do have English as their first language, they really have to be aware of their speed of language, of the speed of their talking, but also the idioms and their usage of the language. And so that's something that comes with time, but it's something that has to be done.
Yeah, you really have to be. You have to be looking at the person that you're talking to, or the people that you're talking to, engaging their comprehension, and avoiding things like sports metaphors and so forth, which just never translate well. Is really important.
Right. And what helps that is that and what we do with our folks is that we actually have them come and visit our clients, and our clients come to visit us as well to develop that relationship, so that we have that context together in what they understand and what they don't understand, and that really helps a lot. So it's not total telecommuting, you could say, but we do have to have some face-to-face contact, because that relationship is really important.
Yeah, I agree. I learned that early on in my experience with doing overseas testing and project works of, if you think you're going to do it all remotely without building face-to-face relationships, it isn't going to work out well.
That's right. That's for sure.
Yeah. Hey, have you seen in with your folks in China different expectations in terms of career paths? Because I've kind of noticed this doing, I do a lot of speaking and training work around the world, and it seems like people's career expectations can vary quite a bit from one place to another as far as where they're going to go in testing.
Yeah, that's a good question. And as far as when I look at when I go into our office and I look at all the testers sitting there working, I notice that most of them are women. And and I talk to our HR folks about that, and the reason is that the men, they all want to be developers. So or if they come in as a tester, they aspire to be a developer. Okay. And so the testing profession has really become a female-dominated profession. So it's good if you're a single guy working in our office, I guess. But I think that's good for us. Our testing team is very, very stable, and I think a lot of that is because they're primarily women.
I think that could vary a lot around the world, though.
You're exactly right. Yeah.
I think now, thinking back, like Malaysia, I think in Kuala Lumpur, I would guess that was, about a third women in the audience there.
That's right. It's probably the opposite in some other countries.
Yeah, certainly. Let's see, Middle East. When I've done work in the Middle East, it varies quite a bit, as you can imagine. So I think it's kind of interesting as to like gender preference or gender distribution in testing. It's I think that's that is a big variable that I've noticed around the world.
And the other thing is, what they see as their career path in testing as well, and how mature testing is in QA in that country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. It's sort of it's on a different wavelength in the different countries. Of like here, it's been popular for quite some while, at least
Mm-hmm.
10 or 15 years, for someone to pop up at a testing conference, ironically enough, every couple years and yell, "Testing is dead," you know. And
They'll say, what?
yeah, and they go, "What is dead?" But I mean, there's a lot of hand wringing over what's DevOps going to do to testing, what's Agile going to do to testing, and so forth. Whereas, I go to other countries where they're big locations for outsourced testing, and they're like, hey, no, testing is great, and it continues. If you look at the numbers, which I'm sure you do, for like international outsourcing of testing, it continues to be a growing industry.
Right, right. And the other point is that hiring and recruiting and managing testers in different locations is a totally different ballgame as well.
Sure.
Different expectations of what they want in their career, different expectations of what they think their career path is. A lot of different things to consider.
Yeah, and what constitutes a successful hire, is going to potentially vary because of those differences in expectations, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know
Yep.
in India, it's a case where people come into a job and fully expect to only be there for a couple years, whereas
If that long.
if that long, right? Whereas I think, for a lot of my clients, they would say, gee, well, when the time somebody's been there for 2 years, they're just really reaching their stride,
Right. Yeah, that's true.
So you have to really, when you're hiring, you gotta look at those expectations in a culturally sensitive way, I guess.
Right. Right. I think what that means really is for those locations that have, or those countries that have high turnovers, to really think about good training systems for training people, getting them up to speed and productive as fast as possible, in order to because you can't fight the turnover, but you can deal with it, right? So those are the kind of things you have to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. So I thought, what do we do at this point, Phil? Is open it up. We got some questions. So I thought we'd maybe take a look at some of these questions.
Okay.
We got a question here from Tony, who says, any tips for test teams collaborating across multiple time zones? I'll let you get started with that one.
Okay. I guess when you're dealing with multiple time zones across different groups, everybody has to basically bend a little bit. And so we've actually worked with development teams in India, where we've got them as well as our end customer, which is in California. And so there's three of us working together on a project, and basically we all have to kind of bend our hours a little bit, and somebody has to get up early and somebody has to stay up late. That's just the way it is, and we take turns at altering, so that one person or one part of the team is not always staying up till midnight. But those are the I guess you could say the trade-offs of working at home, quote unquote, right? You have some sacrifices to make.
Yeah, I've heard some interesting stories about this. I had a guy. He was a director of QA at this industrial controls systems place, and this guy, they were doing a lot of their testing was outsourced into the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
And so apparently, like it was once a week or twice a week, and I can't remember, but I think it might have been Monday morning when this would happen. they would have this meeting that was the end of the day in the Philippines, but for everybody in Texas and Austin where they were, it was 7 o'clock. So he was making his entire leadership team and the QA team be in the office at 7 a.m. on Monday, every Monday morning. And everybody except for him hated that. He was one of those guys that, like, just naturally he wakes up at like 4:30 or 5 o'clock. And so he would just get up and drive to the office anyway at 6 o'clock. And so being on a 7 a.m. call was nothing for him. And every one of his guys that I talked to, his test management team, just hated that meeting. So it's definitely a case study in how not to do it, right? Of like, just do it the way when you want to do it, and then let everybody else deal with it, because they're not going to be very happy.
Right. Well, that kind of gets back to what I was talking about before in terms of us visiting our clients and our clients visiting us, so that we could be with each other and be able to step into each other's shoes, not only from a point of view of, direct face-to-face communication, but really understanding, how we work together. And in terms of being able to swap things back and forth, I think, the empathy factor is really important there.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a question from Lindsay here. And good to hear from you, Lindsay. Hope everything's going well there. She says, do you have any advice or thoughts around managing a remote team without going so far as to become their people managers? I think the distinction she's drawing there is, we manage their tasks, but we don't manage their staff. So she adds, where and how do you draw the line between coordinating a group of remote testers versus managing them directly?
Good
one.
I'm not sure. Maybe you could start on that, and I could chime in, Rick. Not quite sure. Yeah.
So I think where Lindsay's going here is that we've got some tests that need to be run, and we have a remote testing resource. And what we want to do is hand off that work to them in a way that we know it's going to get done. We can be confident that they're going to get it done, but at the same time, we don't want to have to get into managing the people directly. And I've certainly dealt with this a number of times in my career of, you have to have those clear channels of communication between both sides. Some of it can be enabled by tools. In fact, I would say tools are really ideally going to be used, because when I've tried to do this in a semi-manual way of coordinating work using spreadsheets and stuff, it's a nightmare. But a smooth process for dividing up the work to figure out who should do what, and then parceling out the work, handing off the work to the people who are supposed to do it, and then getting those test results of various kinds funneled back through the appropriate systems, I would say, are probably the key things to me. And then in terms of not managing their people, I think this again gets to having good communication with the appropriate points of contact of the remote site. That I don't have to find out that one of the people on the team was out sick for 2 days, because that's all going to be locally, right?
Right. I mean, if you're dealing with a remote team that's doing QA for you, the way that we work with our customers, our clients is, we don't want them to have to worry about managing our people. They give us a job to do and we get it done, and they don't worry about how many hours we put in, or that shouldn't be for them to worry about, or that shouldn't be something that Lindsay should worry about, right? That she should be worrying about defining the task in such a way that it's clear enough for the remote team to understand it. And as far as dividing up the work, that's not something that Lindsay should have to worry about. She should only be thinking about what kind of results do I expect, and when do I expect to get the results.
Yeah, so for clear handoffs in both directions, basically. So while it's in it's on the other side, you're not worrying about it. Basically, while the testing work is being done, it's not.
Right.
You don't have to get into the sausage making.
Right. I think if you don't do the first part well and you don't define the results part well, then you have to worry about the in-between stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way it works, I would think.
Yeah, and that can be kind of symptomatic of a failure to properly hand it off.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
if you're getting sucked into a lot of that kind of how the sausage is to be made stuff, then that can be a warning sign of, hey, we should have done a better job of defining this.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Are you getting into those those analogies now that people that don't speak native English wouldn't
Yeah.
understand? Be careful.
Well, yeah. No, actually, I think that's.
Although everybody makes sausage, I guess.
Well, it's a German thing, right? Because that quote is from Bismarck about those who enjoy sausage and respect the law should never watch either being made.
Okay.
So anyway, I blame Bismarck, but you're right. Yeah, it's easy to slip into that. We have a dissenting voice here, Phil, from Brian, who says, we have weekly conference calls to catch up with our foreign team, but I can't understand them, so I prefer emails. I'm sure you've been on some conference calls like that where it's just like this scratchy, heavily accented voice at the other end, and you're like, oh, man, this is not going well.
Well, you have to do both. We do both. One of them is to sometimes clarify, but the other part is to the voice part of the conference call part is actually it's part of establishing a relationship. That's just the way it works.
Yeah, I would say that maybe they should look at the way that those conference calls are being done. There's some ways of if it's if you've got bad audio, there's some ways of trying to deal with that.
Right, of course. I mean, we've used many different technologies, and it, you just have to experiment to find which one is best.
Yeah. Lindsay says, excellent answers. Thank you both. You're welcome, Lindsay. So we're at the end of our allotted time here, Phil. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And I hope all of you out there listening enjoyed this free webinar from RBCS. We do these free webinars as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not just for profit company. If you enjoy our free webinars and feel that they demonstrate solid insights into the kinds of testing challenges you face, please make RBCS your preferred software testing vendor for expert services, consulting, or training, but not outsourcing. That's you want to talk to Phil about. We're happy to provide a quote for any such help that you might need, and contact us, info@rbcs-us.com. Phil, thanks again for agreeing to take a half an hour out of your conference day to be part of this, and hope you have a good rest of the day.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rex. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Phil. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.